honest truth.
Met Benita Vergatini. Smile 90.4 FM.
The Center for Analytics and Behavioral Change has released its latest report, Social Norms About Gender, on South African Twitter. Joining us to elaborate more on the insights stemming from the report is researcher at the Center for Analytics and Behavioral Change, Carl Janse. Carl, good evening and thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Good evening, Benito, and thank you for having me.
No, an absolute pleasure. So when was the research for the report conducted, Kyle?
It was over August to September period.
And what is the sort of male-female split on X?
In terms of the male-female split, we don't have accurate data in regards to that. So our analytics tool does provide us with some insight, which seem to lean towards the more female comments, but as I've noted, that it's not too accurate because accounts can present as male, they can present as female as well, or they can just not put any sort of demographical data in at all.
Yeah, around the data overview, if one looks at August, what were the key conversation threads?
So some of those key conversation threads concerned leadership in regards to, so you'll note that for the viewers' convenience, I'll explain how we sort of set it out. We set it out in terms of male norms, female norms, and then queer norms. Now, during this entire reporting period, what we found was that leadership, in terms of the male norms, leadership, provision, and displaying strength seemed to be some of the core norms that were perpetuated online. In terms of the female norms, what we found there is that a lot of individuals on X were saying that they like that women should be humble, or they should respect men, or that they are manipulative. And then in terms of the queer community, we found that they are still stigmatized, and there's some concerns around the opening up of norms. I'd love to get into that at a different point.
When one speaks about norms, how do we understand this, Kyle? Are these social constructs that we either internalize through a range of factors, or how do we get to the state where we can describe certain aspects as being a norm?
Yes, so norms are it's convenient to think of them as shared beliefs in social units that tell us how to think, how to feel, and how to behave in any given context or scenario. Now, they act both internally and externally. In terms of your internal norms, those are the way that you are socialized. So the way you grow up, the community, the culture, the religious values, etc. But now we must be careful because that doesn't explain the entire story. You know, I like to think of it as when in Rome. So when in Rome, you do as the Romans do. So the internal norms can't explain behavior of humans. So that's why we look at it externally as well. And that's the environment you find in. So if you were taught a certain norm growing up, whether that be in your family unit, whether that be at your school or your community, and you find yourself outside of that community, you'll note that people change their behavior to suit the community that they are in. And that's what we refer to as the external impact of norms.
What then would be the distinction between descriptive or injunctive norms then, Kyle?
An injunctive norm is something that comes out, that you perceive, that you see, whereas a descriptive norm is more of that is told to you.
Conversations as well. Did the report also pick up different, or what were some of the popular topics, let's say looking at masculine conversations or male conversations in the report? What were some of the trending topics that were picked up upon?
So some of those trending things were this display of leadership.
Okay.
That men need to be strong, men need to provide, and men need to lead. And what we found very interesting in this regard is the paradoxical nature of it, that, you know, men are expected to be responsible and provide, and yet at the same time, you see that South Africa has a very high rate of absentee fathers. Now, if we look to the female norms on the other end, you'd see that same sort of sentiment displayed where women should be humble, respect men. And then, so what we found in our data was that there was a bit of tension in that, where there was a counter to these traditional, what I'd like to call traditional norms of humbleness and being modest. But at the same time, we find that some female presenting accounts actually encouraging it. No, I want my man to be the leader. I want my man to provide. But, we need to also be very careful when we say that. It's not to say that, no, there's a lot of contextual factors that we need to take into consideration there as well. It's the egg before the chicken argument. Is it society? Is it the norms that you grow up, or is it an internal choice that is made?
And those are difficult aspects to distinguish within the report. Were there any accounts do you feel that stood out as unusual?
Yes, definitely. So you'll note at the end of the report, we deal with engagement farming. Now, gender norms, whether male, female, or queer, as we go into in the report, they're very topical at all times. They're quite topical in that there's always conversation around it. Whether it's globally, we see a lot of conversation in the West about what is a man, what is a woman, and how do we define these terms. So what we found is that, if you have a high follower base, you're an influencer. What tends to happen is you hop onto the hot topics, and they'll more often than not get a lot of engagement on these topics. And X has, in the past 2 years, what X has done is they've monetized these high engagement accounts, these influencer accounts. And we found that some of these accounts tend to focus more heavily on posting these types of conversations. So they continue perpetuating these narratives.
And earning money at the same time.
Exactly. It's a nice life.
August and September, were there key events which may have stimulated conversations around the various norms that you've described, Kyle?
Of course, the big one that comes to mind is Women's Month, being in August.
Yeah.
So that's always something we look out for at the CABC, to see the conversations going around. Interestingly enough, and we have done a study on this, we don't find the sort of popular posts being about Women's Month or women empowerment. What we find is that the influencer accounts have an outsized influence on the conversation during Women's Month.
Can you elaborate on that?
I think the issue is strategy, Benito. The issue is strategy. When we post about Women's Month events or female empowerments, well, it could be both norms. Let me say both norms and strategy. There's still not enough conversation between government, between civil society, between business as to how we can rejuvenate Women's Month, rejuvenate the conversation, certainly online, around Women's Month, around women empowerment. So when one of these influencer accounts, they'll post something like men should lead or women should be modest, etc., they tend to have more engagement on their own posts. And that does speak to the normative values of South Africa.
And then it reinforces those particular narratives that you described there then, Kyle.
Yes, exactly. It does. I read an article earlier which actually illustrated the impact, and this is always a worry for us at the CABC, is the impact that these online conversations have on real people, on real perceptions. So in relation to this article, it was focused on Kenya and this notion of the manosphere, which is this loosely connected grouping of men who post in support of these sort of male dominance ideas. And it has a real life impact on people's perceptions as to what is a man, what is a woman, how you should behave in that relationship.
Lastly, Kyle, 16 days of activism for no violence against women and children got underway globally today. What do you feel in that context? How useful can this report then be?
Well, I've been fortunate enough to read the HRSC's recent report on gender norms in South Africa as well. So it's good to see that we're sort of playing on the same wavelength.
Yes.
And it's very positive to see that this conversation is getting started about what we can do, about perceptions, because the issue we're having is we're treating the cause. You're treating violence or the criminal prosecution, whatever process you take, is treating the symptom and not the cause. So once we start grappling with these sort of gender norms that people are socialized into, that people grow into, then we can start to have an earnest discussion with one another around how we can make South Africa a better place. Now we are no longer treating the symptoms, we are treating the actual cause of violence in South Africa. So I'd love to see that in the 16 days campaigns. Let's place that focus on what are we teaching young children? What are the values that we are instilling? What are these gender norms that perpetuate violence, Benito, which is so important in the discussion? So for me, I think that's the value that our report brings and various other reports in the field as well. And we are certainly looking forward to continuing with this. Next year, we'll dive a bit deeper into the male norms. We'll dive a bit deeper into female norms and the queer norms, and look to uncover what drives these norms and how we can address them adequately.
Important discussions to have, absolutely. Researcher at the Center for Analytics and Behavioral Change, Kyle Janse. Appreciate your time and insights, Kyle. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you so much for having me, Benito.
Smile 90.4 FM.
Do remember Conversations on the Honest Truth available for you on